A year or so ago, a movie came out called Dunkirk. It was pretty popular, so I'm guessing some of you have seen it. Hopefully I'm not a spoiler here today. So I just want to get the theme of that. It was an older gentleman and two teenage boys during the World War II time in England, two English people, were getting into the boat. That's kind of how the boat to go across to Dunkirk. Now, the reason they were doing that is because the Germans had the British soldiers, 300,000 and other Allied troops, trapped against the sea at Dunkirk, and they were just picking them off. And at first, they tried to rescue them with big ships, but the big ships proved to be easy marks for the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, and they were just sinking all these big ships. So they decided to send this huge flotilla of all these little British boats, all these English boats. So they're all going across, and of course, we have our featured one, this older gentleman and these two teenage boys heading across. And the first man they come and pull out of the water is a man who's shell-shocked and full of panic and fear. At first, he pleads for them just to turn around. Don't go over there. Just go back to England, Then he demands, and he gets mad, and he says, you must go back to England. He's just full of this fear. And finally, he fights and hurts, of course, the one young man, trying to get him to turn around, but they had their mission. And they were sailing across the sea, or well, not sailing at this point, they had a motor there. But anyway, they were going across the sea to save soldiers, and when they finally got over there, they quickly loaded their boat just full of soldiers, and then they turned around and came back. I bring that image up, that sailing on the boat with a mission, for a reason, because the church has often, down through history, been imagined that way. As a boat, a crew on a boat. We're this crew on this boat, Ascension. And our mission is to kind of carry on the mission of Jesus, God's love for the world, as Jesus has demonstrated and showed us to carry on. And so we're this crew on the boat, and we all have our jobs and positions on that boat to keep this thing going and do this mission to the world. Even in church architecture, that shows up. One of the places I remember seeing a picture of, down the main beam of the sanctuary, they actually hung a boat to keep that image so alive. There's literally, above you here in this aisle would be a boat. And when I came here as a pastor, I remember Pastor Keith showing me up to the altar, and he said, when we did this altar area, the space up here, it's kind of in the shape of the boat, in that sense of the church being a boat, sailing the waters, if you will, of this world for the sake of Jesus. Well, which gets us to our gospel reading. Because, again, Jesus puts his disciples on a boat and commands them to go across the Sea of Galilee. And boats in the ancient world were a particularly good way to travel. If they had to walk around the sea, it'd be a long, slow walk. The boat probably would normally move very quickly across the water. It's about 10 miles or give or take across the Sea of Galilee. And they'd have that done right away. It'd be a fast trip. And they were very efficient in the sails and such. So, but the second thing with the boat is always the danger of it. The danger is you can sink. You can go down in a boat. And in the ancient world, they didn't have life jackets stuffed under the seats. They had none of the flotation devices or anything like that. Maybe you can hang on to the boat as it's trying to stay afloat, even flipped over, but they were at risk. And if you went around the Sea of Galilee, you would saw no advertisements for swimming lessons either. Some of the fishermen or some might have learned to swim, but in general, swimming was not. So if you go down with your boat, all the more likely you're going to die in the ancient world than even you might today. It was to go down is to drown, all likelihood. So the big cause of that, of course, is storms. Storms in the seas. And as Jesus put his disciples on the boat and sent them out late in the day, they run into the storm. It's a bad one. And it says it's battering. The wind and the waves are battering the boat. In our translation, the Greek word behind battering is literally torture. The wind and the waves are torturing this boat, and they're making no progress. And then, of course, night comes. So not only are you facing this terrible storm, this windstorm or whatever is going on, but now you're having to do it at night. And you can imagine the hours of night slowly going by as they just try not to sink, as they just try to survive. I imagine the disciples in the boat, you have your Peter, James, John, and Andrew are the four fishermen, and they're probably the ones manning the rigs and keeping the boat aligned and trying to keep it afloat in terms of kind of captaining the boat's part. I imagine some in the back bailing water because there's water coming in on a boat like that for sure. So they're bailing water. And then there's a few like myself who are sitting there clutching the rail because they're green and they're so sick they would just maybe want to die just to get over this whole thing. And so there's this whole thing going on the boat throughout the entire night. They all want the morning to come, the storm to end, and they're full of fear. They want the storm to end, the morning to come, and they're full of fear for what's going to happen to them. I think we can enter the story a little bit at that very point. We don't maybe have the immediate thing that we're going to sink, but I look across the landscape, the social, cultural landscape, the media landscape of our world, and I see one full of fear. That our fears are stoked in so many different ways. The news programs, of course, reflect that. They always present first whatever's the worst, the terrible, the thing that's going to sink us in this world. The murder report. Even though crime rates are going down, you lead with the murder report. What's the disaster in the world? What's the latest thing that's going wrong out there? We're saturated with this stuff. And it just keeps coming, and part of it's our human nature, because those are the programs we turn to. And so they reflect that very same stuff on our TV shows and our movies. They're disasters, and they're terrible things, and it's about survival and not sinking. And we get awash in a lot of fear. And there's a real downside to being wrapped around fear. Some real downsides. Not only just the stress of dealing with it, but it clouds our thinking. When we're afraid our thinking isn't straight, we're not doing that, and we begin to look at the world as a fearful place, something to be feared. We're triggering way fast on that. That, oh man, here's another disaster. Oh, here's another thing. And it's not saying that it's all wrong. There are things going wrong, and there are things to be afraid of. But I'm talking about just having that internal state of being wrapped around fear, being lost and caught up and always worried that this is going to go down, that things are failing, that things are lost. And I like that sailor that they picked up in the water in that Dunkirk movie, that first one. Well, it's little wonder then that as Jesus walked out to the water on them, they cried out, "It's a ghost!" It's like, that always helps things. Again, they had reason to do that. People, we don't walk on water. I haven't walked on water. People have asked me about that. No, it hasn't happened. Never walked on water. It doesn't work. So that's unusual. They believed that evil spirits were in storms, so that could be an easy thing. But the truth is, they didn't also just look to see who was there. Their eyes weren't able to grasp, well, that's Jesus. They couldn't focus in on what they were actually seeing. And so they jumped to the conclusion, of course, out of fear. It's going to all fall apart. It's not going to work out. You can just feel how that fear boils up in us. Well, Jesus came out to the water, and of course, his response to him was, "Take heart, it is I. Don't be afraid." I want to translate that. Don't be lost in your fear. There's always some fear. I don't think we get a pass on that one. But don't be wrapped around your fear. Take heart means find courage. Find some courage. Because when you are encouraged, you're able to handle what the world brings you, what it throws at you. Your mind's not fogged up. You're not seeing all the things that can go wrong. You're looking for what you can do, the good that you can do. And the reason you can be encouraged is because one is with you, who's above the water, not sinking, who is not being lost in the wind and the waves that are battering. This one, the voice from that other side, the spiritual realm, is addressing you, saying, "Take heart, it is I." There's something more here than what you see around you when that storm is battering. There's a greater something going on. Week after week, we come back to this space to gather together, and maybe a big chunk of the center of that is just to hear those words again. For you can come from weeks at your work or in your families or circumstances in your life that they feel like they're battering you. They're torturing you. It's falling apart. Something's going wrong. And it just seems like God is just missing. and you're not encouraged, the fear of the world starts soaking in, and you need to hear the words again. Take heart. Take heart. It is I. There is one who is walking through all that stuff that is unaffected by it. That the gospel, the word that comes here, is for you. And then we come and we gather around the boat up here, huh? We put our hands out. And once again, Jesus, through this food, this bread and wine, is saying, take heart. It is I. You don't have to be afraid, lost in your fear. And he comes to us. Well, if we ended the story there, and we could, we could go with Peter. Of course, he has it kind of takes it to another level, this whole thing of fear and sinking. But the story goes on, and I realized in the gospel reading, I probably should have had the last two chapters of this chapter 14 included, because Jesus eventually sails on to the far side of the shore with his disciples. And they get out of the boat, people hear about him, they come, and they want healing. And Jesus heals them. And the reason I think that's so important is because it's not just supposed to end with us taking heart, feeling some relief from the fear, and stopping there. The journey for us all goes on. Because the world around us, these people around us, they are struggling too. They are being battered by the wind and the rain and the waves of this world, and they are caught up in the fears that surround them, and they're afraid of sinking. And they too need to know there's one who stands above it all, who can help them in their issues, whether it be with their physical health, or this last couple of weeks we've been helping out with Interfaith Hospitality Network, where it's 3 or 4 families who would otherwise be on the streets, sleeping in cars potentially, or on the streets, aren't on the streets because we've helped. And as we look down the road as a church and see what else we're up to, what's ahead of us, we're going to be working on world hunger. And again, we just don't back the truck up and dump a bunch of food out with world hunger. We try to find a way to help people be sustainable. And this year, we're going to be working at getting them pigs. A wide, huge swath of the world, the basic farm animal that can feed you year after year is pigs. And if we supply them with pigs, they can raise those pigs and have a better, steady food source. There's a lot of people out there battered by wind and rain, not just us. A lot of people afraid of sinking that need to know there's one among them who can tell them, look them in the eye and tell them, take heart, it is I. And they can literally be encouraged from something more than this world can give them. Yeah, the boat sails on. What we've been given, we pass on. Take heart. It is I. And as you leave, I hope beyond just what we do as a church, that the people you contact, you walk with, that might be your message, that might be your theme, that you might have that in you as you do whatever you do this week. The person who says to them, take heart. There's one above us who walks through the wind and the waves. Amen.